Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos, and today I wanted to make some predictions about what specs are going to be good in Mythic Plus in patch 9.1. Now, a bunch of caveats here. First off, if you're interested in a raid version of this, I made a video like that yesterday, so you can go check that one out if you're more curious about what I think for raid. Second of all, this is predictions. This is not anything that I would put too much weight into. Certainly not something I would invite or uninvite people off of. If you're trying to make a decision between different specs, maybe I'll say something that's interesting and useful for you, but I would still say do a lot of research on the particular specs that you're kind of choosing between, and also be ready to make adjustments based on what actually starts working out when the patch comes out. But I always think it's interesting to get predictions beforehand, because then we can look back at it later and be like, oh, how useful is this person's predictions? How dumb are they overall? So that's what I'm doing here. I'm putting myself in a position to get data backed up when you call me dumb in a couple months' time. So with that being said, let's talk about Mythic Plus. I think that Mythic Plus, the metagame is going to be... well, first off, let's talk about the impact of the seasonal affix. The seasonal affix, Tormented, from what I've seen so far, the main pressure I see from it is there will probably be some incentive to skip more stuff earlier in the dungeon. So I think that is good news for something like Rogue with Shroud of Concealment, because then you kill the mini-bosses, you get your 4 anima powers, and you can do more of your trash count later in the dungeon when you're more powerful than earlier in the dungeon. So I think that will be potentially pretty good. On the other hand, Invis pots are really good this expansion as well. There's much lower cost using Invis pots than there was last expansion. So I think it's moderate to good news for Rogue. The main thing that I think is good news for Rogue is that Rogue is just a really powerful Mythic Plus DPS melee option in general, because you're bringing a high survivability spec that's high utility as well. And you've got that melee duration on your kick. It's nice to have somebody with a short cooldown on kick in your group. And rogues in particular, they're durable in this world of Shadowlands where you've got all these random frontals that are murdering random melee DPS. Rogues have a longer range, particularly Outlaw does, and they have cheat deaths and stuff, and all kinds of defensive buttons that can be used to forestall that death as long as possible. So I think Outlaw is pretty likely to continue to be a really top-tier spec. I think that a very common group comp is likely to include Outlaw Rogues this season. I'm actually pretty hyped about Assassination as well. I personally prefer Assassination. I love Assassination. I'll probably do Assassination keys this season as long as it is somewhat close to Outlaw, and as long as my group isn't going too hard. The harder they go, the more likely I am to just play Outlaw if that is the best. I'm going to put Assassination in B for now, but it's like high B, and I'm hopeful it's like A, and I can, make it sing and turn it into an S type thing. Subtlety Spec I'm a little bit less excited about this season. There's been a couple of changes to it that I think are addressed at PvP, but also I think are just in general kind of nerf-shaped. That theoretically their AoE's gotten a little better, but I don't know. I'm not too hyped about sub this coming season. Okay, let's transition from talking about DPS to talking about tanks for a bit. All the tanks have gotten, I think, a lot closer going into this season than they were at the start of last season. Vengeance has gotten a series of small nerfs, and every other tank spec has gotten buffs, and I think that that's going to be really good. I think Vengeance will continue to be a totally fine and playable tank pick. I'm going to put them up in A. I think that they will be really good. The Chaos brand they bring is still a lot of damage for a tank to bring, and particularly if you're playing Kyrian, there's been good buffs towards... I talked about this yesterday in the raid video, but particularly for keys, getting access to Elysian Decree on less than a 30-second cooldown in AoE, getting access to Brawn that's showing up 4 times more often than he did last patch for Vengeance Demon Hunters. Pretty exciting. So I'm kind of hyped about trying out this thing. I think this will actually be a pretty good tank option. But the tank that I'm also really excited about is Guardian. Guardian obviously has seen a lot of play in stuff like the Great Push last season, and I think that it will be a really solid tank that reduces the need to kite in your group compared to other tanks. I think this is a tank that can stay in, can live these pulls, particularly on their Incarn. If they're playing that Ursox Fury legendary, they can just make these pulls work that no other tank can make work. So I'm pretty excited about them as well. Other tank specs that I think are going to be pretty good. Prot Warrior, you're bringing Battle Shout, you're doing really well against physical damage, and you have Spell Reflect actually for a lot of the magic damage in the dungeons too. Prot Warrior is pretty weak to like dot-based incoming damage and heavy sustained incoming magic damage, but their shield block uptime against physical has gotten really high with the new Reprisal Legendary that came out like halfway through the last patch, and I think that they are going to be a pretty compelling choice for Mythic Plus as well. The other tank specs, though, I don't think will be bad either. I would say, so this is going to be kind of similar to my raid prediction. I think Prot Pally is one where I think that in the high-end keys, it's going to have some trouble with the survival aspect of things. It's actually probably the best tank if you're trying to go and get Keystone Master, push up your score, and play with 4 people who you're not in voice with and who you've never met before and you're never going to see again. Prot Pally is the tank that can do the most stuff that you need to do to survive a run, right? If you need to interrupt something, Prot Pally's got Avenger Shields, got Kick, you can take care of all kinds of stuff and solo a lot of the pulls where there's like 5 different jobs that need to get done. Prot Pally is the tank that can just do it all themselves. So a good Prot Pally is a really great choice for pushing Keystone Master and Pugs with, but I think it will fall off a little bit in the high-end keys, which is what I'm making this list around. Blood Death Knight, I would put this... I'm torn between putting this in B and A. I'm going to put it in A. It's right on that line, though, for at least my prediction of where I think it's going to land. This is a spec that has gotten a lot tankier recently. It still does have that, Blood Death Knight start of pull, particularly start of dungeon, if there's a big pull where you're coming in with low resources. But if you can manage it well, if you can come out of each pull with a refresh on your Bone Shield stacks, with a bunch of runic power, you can go into the next pull and already be pretty tanky. And yeah, I'm reasonably excited about this spec. Okay, other tank specs. Which ones have I missed? I've definitely missed one tank spec. Haven't I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, I have. Brewmaster. There it is. Okay, Brewmaster. Brewmaster's also gotten some buffs over time, and this is another spec that I think is going to be a pretty good option for M+. I'm going to throw them at the top of the B tier, down a little bit below. They still require a lot of healing to be kept up in a key. I think, though, that given they're bringing that, or given you have that, they actually do have a lot of nice utility in dungeons. Ring of Peace, really valuable effect, especially on some affix weeks. And yeah, I would say that, I have the tanks separated into these 2 different tiers, but most of these tanks are right at the bottom of one tier of A or the top of B. I would say that it's probably Guardian. I would put Guardian at like the top of A tier. So I think Guardian is the one I'm most excited about, and these other 5 are within half a tier of each other. Okay, that's tanks. Let's talk a little bit about healers. Venthyr Holy Paladin is a huge damage dealer that has gotten some nerfs coming into this patch. I don't think they are enough to stop it from being a dominating healer in high-end Mythic Plus. I don't think that's going to be the story in like weekly 15s, Keystone Master pushing at all. I think in those keys, most of the healers are going to be totally fine. And in fact, the Holy Pallies you run into will likely be playing Kyrian as well. And it's not like about that Venthyr damage. But I think in the high-end keys, that will continue to be the best thing that any healer can bring. I think that of the other healers, Resto Shaman also pretty excited about. Where is that? Where's that Resto Shaman? There it is. I'm going to put them up in A. And then for high-end keys, I'm going to put the other healing specs all together down in B. Again, I don't think there's a huge gap that exists between these. I think that good players of these specs will be able to push up to pretty high keys without running into walls. But I think that the damage that's being contributed by Holy Paladin and the all-around really, really well-suited kit to Mythic Plus this season from Resto Shaman will be giving them a little bit of a head up. Head up? Is that the right phrase? I can't think of what I'm trying to say, so yeah. A leg up. That's the one. A leg up. Okay, let's talk about Dps Death Knights. Dps Death Knights actually kind of crank. Frost Death Knight actually kind of cranks from what I've seen. I don't know how it will work out this season exactly. My guess is that these 2 specs are going to be kind of these perennial B-tier specs where it's like, hey, if you've got a Death Knight that that does a lot of damage, they'll be able to do some keys. I don't think the groups that exist to do high-end Mythic Plus will be seeking out DPS Death Knights or anything. But I think that they will work out totally fine, and I think that either of these specs played well will be doing solid damage and worthy of a spot in a lot of mid to high end groups. Havoc Demon Hunter. Where to put it? I'm gonna put it pretty high up in B, but I'm not gonna bring them up into A. I think that for most of the top end groups, the melee slot is probably going to be a rogue and then 2 ranged is I think still the most likely group composition. So I'm struggling to put other melee specs into these A and S tiers, but I think Havoc is pretty close. The damage is good. They do a lot of nice stuff in Mythic Plus. They're a durable spec that's pretty hard to kill, and they bring actually darkness can be pretty valuable as well on something like say the Incinerator mob. I bet that's going to be something that's pretty useful. But yeah, I still don't think that you're going to see Havocs in the top 20 runs in the way that you did in like BFA Season 4. So I'm going to put them in B as well, but the top of B tier. Boomkins. So Boomkins have this Stellar Drift nerf that is more impactful in Mythic Plus than it will be in Raid. And they have this Venthyr Covenant legendary that's going to be powerful for them in Raid, but I don't think is going to be as sick in Mythic Plus. I think Boomkin will continue to be pretty good, but I would say that they are taking a hit from where they were last patch. I think there's also a pretty big quality of life hit here, which is, the Stellar Drift change is going to make it like a lot more annoying to play, rather than actually making them that much worse or anything. But I think they will continue to be pretty good, and I think that there's a good chance you'll continue to see Moonkins in the top groups. Okay, Feral Druid. I'm going to throw Feral down in C along with Subtlety. Again, Feral, a spec that if you know somebody who does a lot of damage on Feral, I think they'll be able to earn a spot like that, but I really don't think that there's anything that groups will be looking for from Feral. Feral does actually do uncapped AoE with their bleeds, but it's not like a lot of damage from what I've seen either. So I don't think that's enough to nudge them upwards from where they are at. A spec that I do think can get nudged up from where it is, though, is Survival Hunter. Survival Hunter, I'm going to put in the middle to top end of B, but I'm going to play some of this next season in M+. I'm pretty excited about this thing. Survival Hunter with this tree here, the Forge Light tree of Kyrian. You got 40-second cooldown Resonating Arrow, and I think it will be big AoE pump. Survival is also a spec that has a DPS legendary that is AoE focused. Survival has a really strong AoE focused build with legendary to support it, with this new Soulbind tree to support it. So I think that they will pump out crazy AoE damage over the course of a dungeon run, and I'm reasonably excited about that spec in that context. But of course, tempered expectations here. I don't think that I would love for them to be good enough to break into these high tiers. I'm going to try and play one and have some fun with it, but this where it is right now is probably still an overestimate, to be honest. Okay, let's talk about Mage, because Mage is a hard one to put my finger on for Mythic Plus. I believe that a Mage will still be valuable in groups. Fire has gotten a lot of nerfs. It's gotten a lot of AoE nerfs in particular. It's gotten nerfs to Kindling and stuff, but it's also gotten nerfs to Flame Strike and Flame Patch, as well as some Conduit nerfs. And overall, it's so tough because Fire was so good last season. It was so good that I think it probably had room to get a pretty big nerf and still be good. But I don't know if it will be the best Mage spec. I think it might still be, though. I've seen a lot of people that are like, oh, Fire is dead in M+. I agree Fire is less likely to be a good Raid spec. I think it will be the worst of the three for Raid. But the kit is so well suited to Mythic Plus just in general. I think that all three Mage specs... Well, okay, I think Fire and Frost are the most likely two to be good in M+. I think Arcane, a spec that I think is the most likely to be good in Raid, not far behind either. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to put Arcane in that middle to top of the B tier, and I'm going to put Frost and Fire in A. I think that one of these two specs is likely to be earning a spot in most M+ groups. Early on in the season, I think you'll see people just playing their Raid stuff, which I think will include a lot of Kyrians, but I think as the season goes on, you'll see one of these specs become the dominant M+ Mage spec, but I'm not extremely confident about this either way. I could see it being really any of the three Mage specs. Okay, let's talk about Hunter. Hunter started 9.0 as a spec that was actually one of the most invited Mythic Plus specs across all levels of keys, including the highest end. Then their Wild Spirits got nerfed, and also groups started progressing those high-end keys to the point where the fragile nature of the Hunter class, the fact that it has relatively few, damage reduction effects, it's just sitting there with like Turtle and then like a 3-minute 2% DR or something, and that's the only stuff it's got in its kit to really keep itself alive. I know there's people writing comments now that are listing an encyclopedia of all the abilities Hunter has, but really in terms of impact, they're pretty small to stay alive. So that is something that will be, I think, similarly true this season, which is when you start getting to those high keys, they're going to fall off a little bit from where they started. But what I think is going to be different than, say, Shadowland Season 1 and BFA Season 4 is that I don't think Hunter's even going to start off in a particularly high spot. I think their damage is just looking less exciting than usual. So I'm going to put MM in the middle of the B tier. I'm going to put BM maybe the top of the C. Bottom of the B tier. Bottom of the B tier. For now. So yes, I'm putting Survival as the top Hunter spec for Mythic Plus next patch. This is going to be a part of the video that will get linked back to me at this timestamp and used to make fun of me, but that's my prediction. There it is. Okay. With all my credibility incinerated, let's move on to Windwalker. I think Windwalker is going to be a good melee spec for this upcoming patch. Does a lot of damage in AoE, good damage profile. I don't know if it will earn a spot in top groups a lot, but I think it'll be pretty close. So I think that this is a spec that is right on this line here between A and B. It's really good damage profile for Mythic Plus. Does have a little bit of those kind of fragile issues, but I think it overcomes it by just doing a huge amount of damage. Ret Pally, also a spec that's doing pretty good damage this coming tier. It's a weird spec in that in some ways it's extremely durable, and in other ways it's also a pretty fragile spec. But I'm going to put it in the middle of the B tier. I think that this is a spec that I would really describe it as a good Ret Pally, you'll bring him to some keys, they'll pump damage, it'll be good. But I don't think those top end groups will be like, we need to make our multi-classer learn Ret this season. Okay, Shaman. Enhancement, actually pretty good damage profile for Mythic Plus. I think they'll be better in Mythic Plus than they are in Raid. I'm going to put them right at the bottom of that B tier. Elemental, though, I'm going to put them all the way up in A. I think Elemental is a powerhouse spec that does quite a bit of damage. I'm actually going to move them right up here, a little bit above. Okay, I'm going to drop them here, right between the two Mage specs. And I think that this is a spec that brings a good damage profile and brings a lot of damage to Mythic Plus. Okay, let's talk about Warlocks. I've left the Warlock specs here till the end, not for any particular reason, just that was how the train of thought worked. This video has not been planned in terms of which specs I'm going to talk about in which order. We've been following the, feverish machinations of my brain here. I think that Warlock is a spec that, so I think the Affliction nerfs probably are going to bring it away from being the spec that Warlocks play in M+. I'd put them maybe high C, low B in terms of how useful they'll be. But I actually think Destro and Demo continue to have a reasonable shot of showing up here. I think you'll see a lot of people playing Destro because it's, I think, the spec that they'll be playing the most in Raid. And I think it'll be decent. The cooldown timings on it are a little bit clunky, though. I think the spec that is most likely to be a reasonably good M+ choice for Warlock is going to be Demo. I'm going to put Demo reasonably high up in the B tier as well. So again, I think that'll be a case of good Warlocks playing Demo, doing a lot of damage will be worth bringing. Absolutely. And I don't think that top groups will necessarily be seeking them out, but I think this will be a pretty good season for Warlock M+ compared to some of them in the past. Okay, Shadow Priest. This is a hard one for me. I've made a pretty high prediction of them in Raid. I put them right at the top of my S tier. In Mythic Plus, I think their damage is also pretty strong. They have a pretty strong M+ build. I don't think they're going to be a dominating M+ spec. I do think they're going to be really good in Raid. I'm going to put them in the middle of the A tier, though. I think that they're going to be a high enough damage dealer that they'll be worth bringing for a lot of content as well. So yeah, I'm going to put them there. I think the seasons of PIing the Fire Mage, probably over. PIing the Holy Paladin, maybe still better, but PIing the Priest themselves is likely to be a pretty good move, too. All right, that leaves me with DPS Warriors. So Arms is a spec that I'm less excited about actually than Fury. I think Fury, particularly as long as you are pulling, like if you're pulling 4 or 5 mobs, Fury actually does so much damage in that context. Arms can be decent too for it, but my guess here is that Arms goes somewhere like this, and Fury, man, this is a big B tier. This is, I've really not made any really firm predictions with this, I guess, but there's where I will deposit Fury for now. Solid damage, but not something that I think will get sought out. So, let's synthesize this. What am I saying with this? First of all, I think the balance is particularly good this coming patch from what I've seen so far. I think that there are relatively few huge outliers, and I think that for the most part, in a way that hasn't always been true, you will be able to overcome the difference between specs, particularly like within this tier, but also even extending a tier up and down. I think you'll be able to overcome the differences between spec balance with player skill, which people talk about that all the time. They always are like, oh yeah, just play whatever you're good at, play whatever you know. That's the best option for you. I think that is pretty true this patch, but it isn't always true. There are often patches where, particularly in Mythic Plus, the balance is pretty far off. And I think that for the most part, they've done a good job of clumping the specs reasonably closely together, is my prediction right now. We'll have to see actually how this turns out in practice. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of new, soulbind traits that we have to see how they exactly shake out. My prediction, though, is that, yeah, top groups will be Holy Paladin, Outlaw Rogue containing, and then they will be playing a tank from this set, most likely the Bear. Maybe I'll move the Death Knight down to the bottom of this tier. But most likely the Bear, I think, will be really good for those high-end push groups, with all tanks being really good at all levels. But the groups that are like trying to pick the best tank, I think, will usually land on one of these three, maybe weighted towards this one. And then I think that the bread and butter DPS specs will be these range DPS specs, and a lot of groups will instead choose one of the specs from this tier based on who they know that does good damage that is in those specs. So that's my prediction. We can check it later. We can take a look at the top of the Radar IO leaderboards. Could be a fun little video if I remember to make one, where we revisit this one and I rate my own predictions. But that is the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was interesting for you. Again, please don't invite or uninvite people based off of this sort of video. Even in the middle of the patch, when maybe we'll do another one of these that's more based on statistics and stuff, that's a bad idea. But in particular right now, this is a lot of predictions based off of second and third hand knowledge about a ton of specs that I either play only a little bit or haven't played since previous patches. And so really do take them with a grain of salt. Let me know in the comments below if you have strong opinions about this stuff in particular. I think it's just an interesting conversation to have. I think it's always cool to think about how patch notes are going to actually impact the game balance. It's a good skill to develop. But, don't take it too seriously, right? It's a prediction tier list. So, that's this video. Hope you liked it. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.